Thank you for being here. Okay, it's going to be, I'm hoping, a very interesting discussion. We've been hearing a lot about images. We've been hearing a lot about text. We've been hearing a lot about video and stuff. We've been hearing basically about everything that assaults the senses. And I don't think anything assaults the senses like images. You might have heard me disagreeing with one of the panelists earlier today about the fact that sort of images are the sort of thing that, you know, are real. I tend to think that, in fact, in this day and age, one of the things that is the least real of all are actually images, with deep fakes now actually going into the realm of video as well. And it's becoming more and more difficult, unless you're a total expert in the area, to actually, you know, find out, to actually realize that what you're watching isn't the real thing. It's got really, really good. I mean, we had already done that with still images with Photoshop quite a long time ago. We know the famous O.J. Simpson case with Time and Newsweek, the very, very different sort of slight darkening of the skin, which impinged so much on the politics of the whole case. And we've seen so many sort of, you know, doctored images along the way that only an expert would really actually see the joins, if you know what I mean. So our discussion today is going to be about that, okay? When a long time ago, way back in the past, after illustration sort of died in the wake of the development of photography, and photography actually creating a completely new dimension in journalism, etc., etc., everybody sort of immediately said, okay, so now we have one way of actually really knowing the truth, and that is seeing a photograph. Well, we know that is no longer the case. Yes, that is our missing panelist, by the way. He's just turned up.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, no problem. All right, so I think we can start off from the premise that that old adage of the image being an exact mirror of the truth is definitely no longer the case, and it hasn't been the case for a very long time. And now even moving images, of course, we can sort of go on, audio, etc., etc. Everything can be fake, and everything can be real. Our panelists are going to be talking about different aspects of, you know, visuality and visibility, if you like, okay? And the title is interesting and poignant at the same time, Exploring Visual Truths and Untruths. I don't think we can explore visual truths and untruths. I think we can try to understand how the untruths can actually be passed on. Well, Massimiliano's looking at me with a really, really pleasant smile on his face, saying he's exactly what he's going to do. So there's no problem. But he's not starting. Professor Vince Briffa is. Vince, take it from there.
Thank you, George. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start off actually from contesting something that was said in the plenary this morning, that images aren't contestable. And that's exactly the opposite in my case. I'd be talking about my experience as a practicing artist and the way I look at my truth, and the way actually that this truth actually becomes central to whatever I produce. Excuse me. Excuse my voice because I'm a bit hoarse this morning. I'd like to start from something that Picasso said, and the line there, art is the lie that reveals the truth, is actually taken from one of Picasso's interviews. And it's interesting and poignant to look at this the way that this artist looks at truth, by having a look at one of his most important works, which is Guernica from 1937. Guernica was a commissioned piece for Picasso, and the painting actually depicted or showed his truth in relation to the Civil War. Now, it's very, very interesting to note that Picasso, in a sense, was not part of this truth. He was living elsewhere. He was not in Spain, he was living in Paris. And therefore, he came to this truth from a very interesting standpoint. Picasso obviously, this painting became very iconic during, subsequent to his producing it. But really and truly, Picasso came to do this painting after reading an article, and after reading an article on a newspaper. So it was the journalist who was actually driving this kind of truth towards the artist, and the artist was actually reacting to this truth. So you ask, how can someone create something which is truthful if that person has not been part of that experience? And therefore, this becomes a very interesting question when one looks at the process of art making. And one that I hope that I will tackle through showing some of my experiences and some of my work. My background is fine art. I am a practicing artist. I was trained in painting. But during the mid-90s, I introduced video into my art practice. And therefore, this has changed the way that I work with my materials, because I cross very, very easily between traditional and electronic and digital media. So art is the light that reveals the truth. And this is very much the way that I look at starting all of my work. I try to place myself, and I try to place the viewer, especially, in a very hazy situation. As you know, with every truth, there are two sides, right? Or even more. And my intention is actually to explore that hazy demarcation line between the truth and the lie, and how this can be done through the process of image making. So, in a way, I construct my images in order to address this reality, which is which sits exactly at the demarcation line between the truth and lie. I do subscribe to the fact that art cannot represent reality, but it does only reflect a person's perception of reality. We take a lot of images for granted nowadays, okay? And we actually are questioning some images, but others we don't even bat an eyelid to take them just to absorb them. And this is this exercise obviously becomes very, very foundational when you start working with images and becomes part of the driving force of the artistic practice. So I'd like to speak about 3 or 4 works of mine which actually do this kind of thing. Way back in 2001, I was commissioned to do a piece for a cathedral in Austria. This cathedral is in Feldkirch. It's on the borderline with Liechtenstein, and the work was commissioned, is a site-specific commission for this cathedral. And in 2002, when projection was quite in its infancy, I decided to do a work, quite a large work, that had its driving force was quite journalistic. So I said, okay, let me put myself inside the journalist's shoes and let me just document some realities which are not mine. So what I decided to do, being a cathedral, was to interview a large number of people, local people, who in some way had a spiritual connection. Okay, so there were people who had seen visions of saints, people who had been through a very difficult patch in their lives, and spoke about their experience, and so on and so forth. My only intention was to document these people, and to put these people as the kind of modern-day saints, the people these are the saints of today within this cathedral, which, by the way, is not used anymore in its original function, as there were some digging done, and they found some Roman ruins, and then, it couldn't function anymore as a cathedral. So actually, what I did was I gave this cathedral its original intention, that of prayer, okay, through these interviews. So what I did as well was to have images of these people, printed on mirrors and these very tacky electric lights in front of them, sort of elevating these people to modern-day saints. Don't forget, these people are speaking in Maltese in this cathedral, which is in Austria. Okay, so as soon as you enter this cathedral, you get this sense of prayer. There's this hush kind of talking. And you become one with the space. So the space became this container for prayer. But then, of course, I wanted the viewer to become to sit exactly at the demarcation line between truth and lie. And what I did was I translated all the interviews into German, okay? So people could actually hear these realities, but also read these realities. And it was very, very interesting trying to notice people's reactions, because people coming into the space had this spiritual kind of feeling, but once they read what these people are talking about, some of them, of course, some of the stories were quite unbelievable or difficult to believe, and so the reactions of the people actually turned exactly as soon as they read the write-ups. And it was interesting for me to play with this kind of truth and lie, because what do we tend to believe? Can truth be manipulated in a sense that if I am creating this atmosphere in the cathedral and then showing a different kind of reality through the text, how does one live with the other? Huh? And so this was the sort of the underlying theme for this work, which in 2002, as I said, was sort of quite used technology in a big way, and it was using the same technology as journalists were using for TV, actually. So it was the television interview that I was using there. Another work from a bit later, Heterotopia, wanted to question the image, the video image. Okay, and it's a site-specific work in a local gallery in Blitz. And I see myself as a manipulator here, because I used recorded footage, live footage, CCTV, all in one work. So you have this story of the gallery assistant, who actually is compulsively texting, and she can't text, obviously, during her work. So she goes to this very small bathroom where she texts from there, okay? And you see her inviting you on the screen, sort of put your Bluetooth on, and if you want, I'll speak to you. And that's what people do. First thing they do is, encounter that small monitor. That's where obviously there's a recorded film of the girl asking you to switch your Bluetooth on. As soon as you do that, you start getting messages from this girl, and you see this girl on. She's inside the bathroom there, so there is a CCTV feed, but there's also a CCTV feed in the gallery. So the people in the gallery are actually seeing two feeds. One is the bathroom feed, and the other one is the gallery feed. Okay, and the bathroom feed actually changes into a recorded feed. So you start getting these messages from someone who is not there, really. Huh? And the underlying driver was this chatbot that was actually asking questions to these people, And you end up, after this experience in the gallery, you go home with a chat with someone who has never been inside the space, and you start asking yourself, okay, where's the reality here? Was she there or wasn't she? In fact, in some instances, there was also a part performance where we see this girl actually walking in the gallery. So, there are these levels of belief that are all the time sort of working in this work. And it's interesting to try to gauge what we believe, how the belief structures that are in these images and in these videos. In fact, when I ask people about this, the video that just starts off the experience, many people don't even know if it's recorded or live, and they don't even care, really. I mean, sometimes they don't even care about the level of belief of the works that we're absorbing. Another short, quickly I'll explain another work from 2007. This was a commissioned work for the Preston Minster in the UK, and I decided to create a game that is played inside the cathedral at the same time as the mass was celebrated. And so I was again working with structures of belief. I mean, it's a Gothic cathedral, but then I inserted some Renaissance artifacts. People just absorb them as church furniture, basically. And so this work was again an interactive work where there's this girl who wakes up in the morning in this huge mansion. She loses her cat, and you're actually helping her out to find the cat. Now, as you can see, it's within this church, and the screen is, you're looking up at the screen. So there are these levels of belief, that go back to religion, and we're looking up at the sky. We're talking about these micro-narratives that, in a sense, create our daily life, yeah? Life is made up of these very small decisions that, we call destiny sometimes. I'll just close with one work which is more recent, and work which is very much close to heart. As you can see, I use aesthetics that are not of this perhaps of the century. They're sometimes I like playing with this kind of modernist aesthetic where which takes us back to perhaps the modern art period. And this work, which is called Nar Nir, Nar and Nir are the highest values of red and blue, okay, is actually a live CCTV surveillance of these two colors, okay? So obviously the two cameras are surveying these two colors and there's nothing happening, okay? But then the cameras actually feed into two monitors, and these monitors are giving out the gray tone of red and the gray tone of blue, and they're exactly the same gray tone. And to me, this work is very politicized to the local context. Of course, we all know what, I mean, the people who are from Malta know the highly charged red and blue politics. But then at the end of the day, if one looks at the right grayscale of the two colors, at some point these two colors actually meet. And so therefore, they're basically saying the same thing here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just a very quick question, Vince, before we go on to the next panelist. apart from the last one, where you sort of perversely, in a sense, through the sampling of untruths, you actually portray the truth.
Yes.
We know that one of the functions of art, I suppose, is provocation. In most of those images that you were showing us, were you actually sort of, creating a provocative situation where you were deceiving, in a sense?
Yes. Yes.
So deception was actually at the core of what you were trying to do.
Absolutely. I start off from saying, okay, I want to sit exactly in the middle of these two realities.
Mm-hmm.
How can I sort of get these two realities and subvert them totally?
That creates a destabilization of
That creates
reality,
this.
in a sense.
Yes,
Okay.
I do that consciously, very, very consciously. So I subvert reality in order for people to understand that they're, for viewers to understand or to absorb the fact that there's more than one reality working at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vince. Excellent. Okay. We have Anna now. Okay, Anna Topolska, who is an independent researcher, although she does all sorts of other things as well, not just independently research. Okay, and she's actually going to talk about the photography side now. And interesting that it's the sort of the case of war photography, the 19th and 21st century. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. We know of war poetry, for example, and how that sort of, the balance between the glorification and the actual ugliness of reality as portrayed, say Wilfred Owen, for example, or, Rudyard Kipling, to compare the two from the English side. Photography and war photography.
Yes.
Anna, I'm going to leave it up to you. Okay.
Okay. So I'm a historian who works on visual history. That's why I've been researching for some time war photography. And today I'll be speaking very generally about this phenomenon. So it was said,
We can actually, Vince, you can turn the laptop around so Anna can actually see.
Yeah.
Because that makes it easier for her, of course.
Okay, so today I would like to speak about my three theses. The first one is that the myth of visual truth still functions. We heard in the introduction that image, of course, can be fake, but also that we don't question images today. I think that this myth still functions today, and it goes back to the traditional, to the very nature of photography, to the traditional analog photography, where image imprinted on the sensitive material is a direct result of light and presence of an object in front of a camera. But even in the age of digital images, participants of our culture still believe that there is and still believe in this myth, but because there is lack of education, visual education, and we can hardly speak about visual literacy. So I already will say that my idea for a solution to the problems of contemporary post-truth society would be to introduce to the education some kind of visual education, visual literacy. Okay, I also argue that both the digital and pre-digital visual images are phenomena on the intersection of ideology, which can be mythologized, and aesthetics, understood as perception. So, on the one hand, we have visuality as a language. Which is a basis for mythologization processes, which I will discuss in a moment. And on the other hand, our act of perception is already culturally mediated through what I call visual topoi. This set of images that mediate our perception and understanding of what we see. It was already noticed my third thesis. I will speak at the end. It was already noticed by the semiologists in the 1950s and 60s, such as Roland Barthes, who spoke about the mechanisms of mythologization in which images have two levels of interpretation: the sign and the myth. Images rely on specific patterns and comprehensible signs that convey meaning not only by their content or context, but also through references to images in the culture at large. This way, the content can be universalized and naturalized. I will also mention here Siegfried Krakauer, who was making a very interesting comparison between history and photography. So both of these phenomena, on the one hand, they touch reality, photography through this presence of the object in front of the camera, but on the other hand, and history through the historical sources, but on the other hand, they reach for some forms of description, and so it's this duality is the nature of image as well as history. And so we can, what can I say? We should know that that there is no only one side, but there's both aspects. So okay, so I've researched the Balkan conflict in the 1990s. I've analyzed the photographs from the conflict, from this conflict in 3 weekly magazines, and Time, Der Spiegel, and Wprost. It's a Polish weekly, indeed, I counted all the images and looked at all the images from 1991 to 1999, and indeed there were repeating visual topoi. Such as mother with child, child with a gun, a funeral, dead bodies. And these images work as Barthes myths which created a specific narrative about the war. So the general image of the war, which we could read from this narrative, was that, of course, it was a very one-sided view in which Serbs were the perpetrators and Albanians, Bosnians, Croats were the victims. So there were no images of soldiers of the second side. All the images of soldiers were of Serbian soldiers. Almost all the images of victims were of Albanians, Bosnians, Croats. Only one image of a Serbian victim in all these 10 years in Time magazine. So, of course, the victims, and this narrative about the victims was constructed according to those visual topoi, and these images preceded the action of intervention of NATO in the former Yugoslavia. Such images like this, of course, with the caption "Massacre of Innocents," as we can see, it refers to those general myths and the general signs, symbols in culture at large. It is not only what we see, it's not only the current image, but it also refers to some more universal meanings. The most repeated visual topos was mother with child. And these images also preceded a lot of these actions that needed public support. This image refers, and we can read those meanings like the mother is like the motherland, the child, the future of the nation, they are suffering, they are innocent. So this side, which is portrayed by this image, is the innocent side. It refers to those culturally well-known images of mother with Jesus child. Okay, but I noticed that this war in former Yugoslavia was, the image of war in the former Yugoslavia was quite consciously constructed. But why? It was known from already 20 years earlier that about the power that images had on the audience, on the people. So this is the photo which we saw yesterday, the most symbolic and known photo from the war in Vietnam. And photos, of course, journalists in Vietnam, they were not showing the defeat of American soldiers. They wanted to show their success, but by showing their success, they were showing the victims of the other side, and that resulted in the protests, in the demonstrations, anti-war movements. So at that point, the decisive people of media, government, military realized about the power of images. And because of that, later, as I said, in the 90s, on the one hand, we have the war in the former Yugoslavia, where the image was very consciously constructed to trigger expected emotions, expected reactions, support, for example. And on the other hand, so we have to even this quote from David Levi-Strauss, that the generals of the Vietnam era who conducted the operation of Desert Storm, it's about the Gulf War in 1991. On the other hand, we have that war. So these generals realized that modern technologies of communication make it impossible to conduct war in an open way. The war of today needs to be hidden behind the impermeable veil of propaganda. No images of death, no destruction, no puddles of blood after raids, no orphans, no gangrene, no naked little girls burned by napalm. So on the other hand, we have that war. It was taking place in the same time that the conflict in Yugoslavia began. And from that war, we have images that were only showing the technological power of US Army. The war was called because of the image, video game war. There were images of attacking planes, aviation photographs showing hit targets from above, which underlying the precision of the US bombers, and the fact that they were targeting only military objects. We don't see civilians or victims. These images from that war were censored by the army. So again, it was a conscious use. But what's today? What about the society today? I believe that images today function according to similar rules as previously. Most of people still believe in the myth of visual truth and witnessing aspect of photography. But what is more, that's my conclusion, we increasingly deal with what philosopher Wolfgang Welsch called anesthetics, which is the result of more and more prevalent presence of images in our lives. We heard today and yesterday at this conference that there is a shift from text to images. Okay, yes, of course, that's huge, but this results in the situation in which people consume these images only subconsciously, okay, but they don't react any longer. They don't feel emotions. They don't have, it's very shallow perception. Okay. For example, this is the photo from this year, from Syria, found online, and this represents a lot of visual images of this war. And this on the one hand, this image refers to the visuality of Second World War, of cities destroyed during the war, like Warsaw or Dresden. And here we have a photo of Dresden. So, so while on the one hand, the audiences of these images subconsciously read these references, they do not care any longer. So we see so many images that we became immune to them. On the one hand, they lose their power to inspire action, and on the other hand, we more easily take what we see for granted, and we do it more subconsciously. But what is more, in the case of visual true, not only true is problematic, and as always has been, but also proliferation of images of the wars decrease their power, and probably because of that, in the post-truth era of the recent few years, visuality is not used more than in previous decades, like in the conscious creation of reality, and because of that, I also noticed that there is some shift, I would say, to text again, and then from there are more images than text, but the fake news are textual, and images accompany them. Of course, they can be fake and etc. But text is again the weapon, as image was in the 90s. That's what I noticed, because images today lost their power. Okay, so I can finish with that, and we can talk more in the discussion about that issue.
So what I'm getting came out of that was that we started off by talking about sort of images manipulated within themselves, and then Vince went on to talk about the artist manipulating images, and with it manipulating the perception of the audience. And here, what we're talking about is selectivity. We're actually talking about the images themselves are true. They are realistic interpretation of reality. But then there is the gatekeeper who decides on what to select in order to leave out whatever the gatekeeper doesn't want us to see. So we're talking about images that are true now, but images that are also not true because of what, which ones which ones have been chosen to be represented. Excellent. That's another aspect of it. Wonderful. Massimiliano Fusari, okay? I have no doubt.
Okay, sorry.
Oh,
I just needed to...
I looked there and he was gone. Okay, I said, okay, now there's an image that's... Okay, Massimiliano. Massimiliano is going to be talking about the image as storytelling. Now, this is a particularly interesting area. There are so many of those. From Joe Sacco's visual journalism, there we go, all the way to cartooning and the way that the cartoonist actually manipulates the mind of the reader according to what he or she wants on his agenda or her agenda. Massimiliano.
Thank you. You mentioned a fantastic cartoonist. We will talk about that later. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I will develop the issue of the image as storytelling through the dichotomy between ethics and agency. What do you see? Quick, we only have 15 minutes, please. 20, we have 20 minutes. A hangman, more. So one mistake we did is that we were mentioning verbs without attaching to that who's doing what. So we have one person, probably, and then other people with different color, depending on whether we identify that or depending on whether I add this piece of information, being from South Park, massive South Park fan, sorry. And then we have, hopefully, we can hear the debate. No, we cannot.
Our main point is that the flag shouldn't offend anyone because killing has been around since the beginning of time. All animals kill, and the animals that don't kill are stupid ones, like cows and turtles and stuff. So people should not be so upset about killing. Thank you.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! You just missed the point entirely.
Huh?
I'm not mad because the flag shows somebody getting killed. It's because it's racist.
Racist?
Children, don't you even know what this argument is about? That flag is racist because a black man is being hung by white people.
Oh.
Oh!
We didn't really see it that way.
But that's a black man up there!
Yeah, but the color of someone's skin doesn't matter.
Well, of course it matters when... Oh my God. Wait a minute. You children didn't even see the flag as a black man being hanged by white people, did you?
No?
Why, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard.
What?
What?
Don't you see? All this time I thought these little crackers had turned racist, when actually they were so not racist that they didn't even make a separation of black and white to begin with. All they saw when they looked at that flag was 5 people.
Okay, so basically the huge issue we are confronted today is the differentiating what we see from how we interpret that. So if an image is multiple storytelling, and I mentioned this yesterday, so the image is the white ray entering into us as the prism and getting out all the different colors of the rainbow, then is the real representable? I will address this, and I'm really happy that actually you have touched on word photography. This is quite an interesting point to me, having worked as a photojournalist for many years. So the 2 pictures on the top are 2 consequential images produced by Brian Walski, photo report from LA Magazine, LA Times, in Basra, Iraq, 2003. The one on the bottom is the combination of the 2. Issue. First, let me introduce what was the discussion, and then we'll address the ethical and agency issue. So Brian Walski is an award-winning photojournalist from the LA Times. His career ended in 2003 because of his Discover editing, in which he generated a single photograph out of 2 distinct digital files. The image aesthetics suggests the 2 images are most probably consecutive. There might be another one in the middle, but they were shot within 5 to 10 seconds, most arguably, most probably as part of a prolonged sequence. The photographer edited 2 distinct fragments of the reel into a 3rd element in what he addressed as a stronger reel. He did so to produce a better signification of the reel. LA Times immediately dismissed him as he altered the signification of the reel by altering the signification of the representation. Are we clear? Super, thank you. You're much better than my students, I should say. Walski believed that he acted at no detriment to the signification of the reel, and no one else was better placed to make such a decision than himself. He was there. He was working 16 hours a day, every day, producing his images, trying to survive, trying to understand, trying to communicate what he was witnessing. Both photographs record a fragment of the reel, something that certainly happened and was not altered or post-produced in any way. Both photographs are real and true, are singular shots. Does the combination remain true? We'll have a conversation about that. True by reference to what? If we fabricate an artificial reel out of 2 real. And we are ending, as you see, 3 out of 3, we are ending the boring part in verbal words. So photojournalist Pedro Meyer argued that the photographer Brian Walski has been dismissed from the LA Times for no valid reason. The newspaper does not fully understand that the content of the image Walski sent in was not altered in its essence, even though he combined 2 consecutive images. The LA Times fired someone for doing a professional job in trying to come up with a better picture, the same that any journalist polishing a test does regularly. Why should a photographer be deprived of doing exactly the same that other professionals in the same register, obeying the same code of conduct, are doing on a daily basis? So this is the view from the LA Times. By tampering the signification of the representation, Walski altered the signification of the real. The Washington Post stated that news photographs are the equivalent of direct quotation. This is extremely dangerous. And I'm quite surprised that Washington Post stated something like that. Sorry, my comment. Bennett, 2012, advocates the overcoming of the persistent conception of aesthetics as disconnected from social concern, as a practical aesthetics must be one of activism. Again, agency and ethics. Aesthetics as informed by and derived from practical, real-world encounters capable of being used or put into effect in a real situation. In other words, practical aesthetics as a modus operandi rather than a field. Ethics, agency, strategy. In dealing with the contraposition, the juxtaposition between the real and the representation. We saw this quote yesterday. To say that light is a medium refers to at least three different things: a signal of information, a message, and a channel. Depending on how we address this, we are getting to specific alternative results. How to rethink visual media for reliable visual journalism. I'll break what I wanted to do, and I'm going to ask from the audience, what do you think? How much time do we have?
You have 10 minutes left.
Wow. Okay, can you just tell me when we are 4 minutes before the end? Super. Would you have fired Walski? Yes or no? Raise your hand, yes. You are the LA Times. Raise your hands clearly so I can see. Thank you. No. Okay. Don't care? Okay. Why yes?
Well, if you are on Tinder, you are on Tinder, right?
I'm sorry?
On Tinder. Let's say you are on Tinder. And you have a picture of Cindy Crawford.
Of
And,
myself?
No. You have a picture of Cindy Crawford and a picture of me. And you mix them, right? Both real pictures. And you have another image. But that image is not real. It's a representation of two real images. And you believe that that image is real. And you click on it. Tell me, I mean, are you deceived or not?
Okay.
That's how I reason. The fact that two real images.
Microphone, I think the one. So, okay, sorry.
This is a war. It's about war. It's like it's no.
I think we need to go through the microphone. So I stop my presentation exactly because I want to hear from you and having a discussion. Thank you.
Philosopher Plato, he says that he uses the allegory of the cave, where in the beginning, everyone is inside this cave, they don't know proper information, they don't know the truth, and they have to leave this cave. I feel like journalism and adults, they're very responsible to what truth they portray to younger students, to people who are not informed. And I think that although those two images were real, as you put it, they're not the full truth. It's half-truth. How can we believe half-truth if it's not the full truth? We're still inside that cave, as Plato says.
Okay. Sorry. I'm not taking control. The gentleman has, and the ladies over there, sorry. And I want also to hear.
I think the problem is if we had to accept that image, the manipulated, where do you draw the line? So if we accept that one, next time would we accept something even more manipulated? I mean, the difference that it came through was that the gun was pointing at the person with the child. I mean, it was a much more powerful image than the original photo, right? So, you know, once you allow one thing, even though maybe it's not as drastic, but where do you draw the line then at manipulated images?
Thank you. If we accept this.
What about if the image had a disclaimer at the bottom saying this is not what actually happened, but this is a visual, this just represents what happened better? I think that would have made the situation different.
Okay, thank you.
There was a comment before the Washington Post. I did not read the name, but it said, if we fired this photographer for doing it, why don't we fire the journalist as well? For manipulating the words when they put an article, if you put the other slide.
Which one, sorry?
The last one, there we go. Photojournalist Pedro Meyer argued that the photographer has been dismissed for no valid reason, and the newspaper, it says that we should fire someone, there you go, the same way that any of their journalists polish a text so it reads better. The LA Times fired someone for doing a professional, did you get where I am? What my argument is if you are working as a journalist and people think journalists are saying the truth, then let me tell you, if they are polishing their text to read better, then we fire them as well. Because that's not their job.
I'm sorry. I don't want to. No.
No, wait a second.
Sorry, can I just. Sorry. Do you believe that journalists.
No, of course not.
Okay, so,
but let me tell you.
But we need to. We're also. Please go
yes, of course.
straight.
When we ask little kids why they want to be journalists, they tell you because they cover the truth. And at this point, they don't. They work for an agenda, and that's what they do. And we are letting not only journalists, but if we let even photographers manipulate their images, then I don't know what we're doing in this industry.
Okay, thank you. Can I, and then I want also to hear from the no, because they're my side.
I am from the no party. So the way how I would see it, because you need to define exactly what is manipulation. Because, for example, let's say I were to take a group photo of 5 people.
We have 5 minutes. I need to cut you to being very short. I want to hear another one say no, and then I'll say why I think is no. Go.
Okay. So let's say you have a group of 5 people. You've taken different photos. You have people looking in different directions. So you grab one photo which is you think is the most good one, and you have one face which is not in the good direction, and you get one face from another photo, and you manipulate it to do it in a group photo. And that way you have a good result. To a certain extent, you have all the faces facing in one direction. And that is what the photographer wanted in the first place. And in this photo, which we see here, it's a very similar situation. You have the soldier and you have the man carrying the baby. There was one point where the soldier was facing one way, there was the baby which was facing the other way, and then he manipulated the soldier and the baby in order to look in the right direction. So, to a certain extent, you haven't changed
he didn't manipulate it, he merged different things.
Exactly.
No, I'm sorry. We can open a conversation. We have 2 philosophers on this.
So, to a certain extent, he hasn't changed the emotion of that the photo is trying to emit. He manipulated it to a certain extent. So, no, I wouldn't have fired him. No.
Okay, thank you. Can we just, sorry, quick, sir, sorry.
Yeah, I think most people don't like the fact that 2 images were kind of merged in one. But yesterday I think you showed 2 photos of Boris Johnson with the Queen. And that was one photo which both said 2 different messages. So the manipulation doesn't come from joining 2 images. Sometimes it's just from a different point of view, from a different angle. So.
Just because he agrees with you doesn't mean it's okay.
Of course.
I feel like by condemning this photographer, we are setting a very unrealistic expectation for journalism. In the written text, no matter how you try, and we say journalism, the aim is to convey the truth. No journalist conveys the truth. They convey what they see as the truth. Even just by the synonyms they use, the words they use, they can have a whole different connotation, even though they could try being as objective as possible, they, a human, will fail in that sense anyway. And photos are still shots. This was a sequence of events. He was trying to portray that sequence of events as effectively as he can by showing one singular clip. Possibly, we could argue that video would have been a better medium, so you could see the full thing, but we weren't using video, we were using a photo. Also, the madam in the front
3 minutes.
referred to... Can I just say one thing?
Quick.
He said Plato talking about truth. I'll refer to George's. Even if we knew the truth, we can't communicate the truth, and language and visual arts are both very ineffective ways of showing that.
So I take control, sorry. No, take control. No, we have a conversation.
3 words. I just want to say that I'm sorry to intervene, but Tinder and this type of thing are very different things. So there is a political, ideological position here that the photographer is taking. This has nothing to do with how people represent themselves in Tinder. I think we can conflate everything together. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. That was exactly my first point. So I have 3 minutes.
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. You see, you stole 1 minute. Okay, first of all, Tinder. We are talking about 2 very different registers and 2 spaces of communication. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Do I have a tie? Then you are not able to look. Plato, we can have a conversation later. If we accept this, what next? We are already much beyond this, and the issue, I think, and this is what I'm trying to address here, is what I'm trying to produce as a tentative, functional grid of analysis for visual communication. Visual media, the source of information, the what? In other words, the image. The word white. If I say to you white right now, you will think of something white. What you think about your representation on the white is going to be different from mine and from everyone else. Point 2, visual communication. Storytelling as a practice, as a process of communication. The how, the image storytelling. White as the image that you produce in your mind. So visual medium, in this case, is the word white, or is showing you this. How you receive that is the image of your image of the white, the image of storytelling. Third point, visual storytelling. The visual as a strategy, the what for, the image as a symbol. White as purity, whatever you want. How do visualize the real? And I conclude with one last thing. Allow me to do this. Journalism is storytelling. We ignore the boring stuff, turning life into narrative. This is from one of the most interesting journalists I've read. And with this, if it works.
Greetings! I am Salvador Felipe Jacinto Dalí y Domenech, and I am back.
This is where I really hate being the chairman. Oh my God, I wish I could get into that conversation. Never mind. I disagree with him entirely. It's okay. We'll get the chance to discuss that in a bit. No problem whatsoever. We come to Hubertus. Okay, our last speaker, although there's Natalie as well, who I'm sure wouldn't mind saying a few words after all of this. All right. So Hubertus, Hubertus is not just a professor of visual culture, visual philosophy, etc. He's also one of the best photographers I know, and he is tremendous. He's going to talk to us about philosopher, art, photography, and cultural studies, waiting for truth. No, that's him. Waiting for the truth or the time before. Okay, now there's a wonderful title. Waiting for the truth or the time before. Hubertus, take us from there.
Just to make a small correction. Thank you for this introduction. I'm not a photographer. I'm not a photographer. But we all see. We all have our images in mind. So
I've read your books.
So I wrote about photography. But unfortunately, I did not do the images. But I brought text and image together. So I think it was very interesting, the debate that Massimiliano engaged now here. So I'm shifting. I will show you later on one image which should be on the screen.
Is the last?
There are two. Just take one, and then take the other one. Yeah. Now you have time to look at one of the most extraordinary images ever been painted or ever been made, which is near to you here, just some 100 meters. I'll come back to this later. So I think perhaps we agree already that the notion of post-truth is a complete nonsense. It is a dramatic nonsense because we have been using this for years already now. Although post-truth is impossible, you would say it's an oxymoron. There is nothing after truth. There's a history of truth, and there's a time where truth is within the becoming. But a post-truth is what you would call philosophically a contradictio in adjecto. It is a contradiction in the name itself. It does not exist. If we speak about, for instance, postmodernism, makes sense. It makes mostly sense that our eyes and attention are drawn back to what is modernism or modernity and what has been its time. So if we speak about truth, you know, the most simple definition that is given by Aristoteles was very clear, said, if you say that is and it is not, or if you say it is not and it is, it's false. If you say it is not and it is not, if you say it is and it is, it's true. So this is the simplest way. Of course, it doesn't help us because we have lost trust in this. There is no trust. The sentence itself is simple but very complex because it's language. And somebody just before I heard said, well, there is no truth neither in language nor in the image, which is true. Like far later, Nietzsche said, language is an anthropomorphism. So there is no truth, but we still have to go for it. So truth is always on its way. This is why I call it waiting. But before I come to this image, and I'll be very brief, thank you, again, I have to go back to the history. I think yesterday somebody said, we need to destroy the myth. Or I read it. Was it you? No, it wasn't you. Somebody else. And I said, yes, this is just like in the idea of the Enlightenment. We had this already. But on the other hand, the myth had this extraordinary advantage to have a very complex situation very simply put into a narrative. And I'm not now the storyteller, but it's a narrative. Mythology is a narrative. So one of the narratives of the truth, aletheia, the truth which is always within the becoming. It does never stand still. This aletheia, as you may know in the Greek mythology, was built by Prometheus. So aletheia was built out of clay, and there she was beautiful on her feet. And Dolos, who was an assistant of Prometheus, but Dolos is the Greek name for daemon as well. While Prometheus had to go out, had this idea to build a replica of truth. So he did this out of clay, the same. But unfortunately, there was not enough clay to build the feet. So there was aletheia, and there was the second without feet. And then when Prometheus came back, he asked aletheia to come out, and he asked for it. This is very important, because we have to ask for truth. We have to make an enquête. It comes towards us, yes, but we have to come towards truth. Otherwise, there's no encounter. And of course, aletheia came out because she had feet. But the replica could not come out, the lie. So the lie, as we still say together, I don't know if you say that in English as well. In German you say, die Lüge hat kurze Beine. The lie has short legs. Do you say this in English?
The same in Italian.
Okay, so this is where it comes from, of course. And and the other, to finish this, in the Roman mythology, Veritas is the daughter of Kronos. So there is no truth out of time and space. So we are always within time. This is essential for us in order to understand. And it means as well, if somebody says post-truth, he or she wants to indicate that we are in the time after truth, which again is a nonsense. There is no time after truth. We have perhaps reached a moment now where what we had as trust, that we believe in something, that we could speak about plausibilities, about possibilities, about reliabilities, that those are vanishing. You know, trust is based on what we call the cultural capital. The cultural capital is all what brings us together beyond any functionalization, beyond any instrumentalization of the human being or the human acting. And this is what art is. Art is there not to be functionalized, not to be instrumentalized. Art is without any means in a certain way. Filled with meaning coming towards us, but no means. Now, if you look at this work, which is very strange to see this with all those stuff around. Can we not get this away, Vince? Well, just full screen.
The green button in the top left. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you know this picture. I have to stand up now. It is such a, I've been coming to Malta now for the last 5 years. Last 2 years I have not come. And every time, first thing is to go to the St. John to see the painting. So the beheading of St. John. You cannot reproduce it. So this image is truly false. It is completely fake because the light, if you go there 200 meters from here, you will see the light is different. But what you see, and it's interesting in this painting, which is painted 1608, as probably most of you know, you have 3 parts in the painting. So you have the right part of the witnesses, the 2 prisoners. They are witnessing how St. John has already been decapitated, how to say this in English? Or beheaded, not completely. But they are behind bars, so they cannot give their testimony. But they are only the sole witnesses there. And you see the guy with the knife, which is the middle part of it, and as you all know, the famous signature of Michelangelo di Caravaggio out of the blood, which means it is an event and the signature. This is the Jacques Derrida, the Derridian concept of signature and event. It is in one time. It happens. But it's not fulfilled, as you see. You see with a knife behind. So there is a future to come, and which leads to the third part of it, with Salome waiting, impassible, to get the head. But she is not getting the head. And the woman in between and the other one. So there is something to come. And the only ones who are witnessing everything are behind bars. And it's like the witness can never witness for itself. So it's a testimony they will not be able to give. As you know later on, for this painting, the trial against Caravaggio was done against the painting. And you know as well, this very strange, everybody asked about the ropes in front of the bars. So this could have been the rescue for truth. In fact, Caravaggio was rescued by those, when he came out of his dungeon, by those things. So I think photography here, there, whatever, I think if you think of truth, you must think of this becoming. And this is true for text and for an image. There is no truth neither in the text nor in the image. So it is always on, it depends on the relation that you undertake to what you read or what you see. To your drives what you want to see, what you want to read, what you do not want to see, what you do not want to read. So it is always the constellation. Truth is within a constellation. And there's one sentence, I think, and I love it, is of course by Walter Benjamin, who once said, probably truth without hope is unthinkable. Thank you very much.
I'm not even going to try to summarize that. But it's wonderful how we've gone full circle from, you know, the images manipulated, possibly changed, possibly intentionally done so by the creator, to Hubertus's wonderful way of actually putting the reader, the viewer, into the image, actually, you know, seeing it like that. But of course, the word post has always been problematic, hasn't it? I mean, I won't go into postmodernism, shall I? I mean, it's absolute mess. Thank you, Hubertus. We have Natalie here, who I think is going to, although she doesn't have an actual formal presentation, I think I'd love to have your comments about what has been going on, Natalie, okay?
Thank you so much. To all the presenters, I think each of you raised a fantastic new way of approaching the question of image and veracity, which I would like to just take a moment to historicize a little bit. So my background is as an anthropologist, also as a historian in some sense. And so I want to actually key off of Hubertus's centering of the Caravaggio, because the Caravaggio is not only evocative on its own terms as an exquisite masterpiece, but it takes us back to a time when the production of art was an integral component of human ritual life. And so worship, the sacred, were central to the production and to the conception of what art meant. And so, you know, when we think about the history of images, and we look at, you know, the contemporary period, images today are seen mostly as, you know, representational. Even in their post-representational forms, there's the question of what does this image evoke? What meaning is entailed for the author, for the viewer, for the world in which the image is situated? But if you go back in history, you actually see that that approach to images is predicated on a kind of flat metaphysics, where religious understandings of the world have been superseded, in a sense, by a kind of secular flattening. And that's not a bad thing. I'm actually not critiquing that. The further you go back in history, though, what you see is a layered metaphysics, where the order of reality is layered ontologically. And each layer of reality actually corresponds to a different layer of truth. And so you have, for example, the Eastern and Western, until recently, Christian traditions, the notion of the true image, right? And the true image is often called the icon, or a representation that's not actually strictly representational. It's a highly caricatured, aestheticized image, often of a saint or of a holy personage, but is considered more true than actually perhaps other representations, religious representations or non-religious representations would have been. So the true image is true because it accesses an order of reality that is somehow more true than ordinary, mundane reality in which we, exist day to day. And the reason I'm bringing this up is not certainly not to advocate for, a return to a layered metaphysics, but merely to draw attention to the ontological status of truth, which Hubertus also just alluded to. In other words, there is, in fact, more than a subjective experience of truth. There is actually an important question about what happened in this situation. Did that soldier shoot that baby? That is important not only, for the legal juridical reasons or moral ethical reasons, but also because it is a question that gets to the heart of our ability as a species to have any kind of purchase on the world around us. And so it, gets right to the heart of epistemology, how we know what we know, how we know the world is how it is. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the crisis of truth as it's framed today as both a crisis of empiricism and a crisis of authority. Human societies are actually moving beyond the kind of straightforward top-down authority models that we've been accustomed to for most of our histories, simply because we've been so local. When we're limited to particular or local environs, we are also limited to the hierarchical technologies that organize knowledge within those environments, whether it's, the priest or the imam, or, the local tribal chieftain, perhaps even the emperor, far away with his network of vassals. At this point, all of that is relativized. Anyone with an internet connection can immediately access realities that are being generated or expressions of reality that are being generated anywhere in the world. And so when you have a crisis of authority, the question then becomes, on what basis do you build a model of what is true? And so we've seen this amazing resurgence of experience as an alternative to authority discourses. Well, if I can't trust my priest, then I can trust my own experience, right? Well, there is a wonderful essay by historian Joan Scott from 1991 called The Evidence of Experience, where she draws on the historian Michel de Certeau's claim that historical discourse gives itself credibility in the name of the reality which it is supposed to represent. But this authorized appearance of the real serves precisely to camouflage the practice, which in fact determines it. Representation thus disguises the practice that organizes it. And so Scott says, when experience is taken as the origin of knowledge, the vision of the individual subject, the person who had the experience or the historian who recounts it, becomes the bedrock of evidence on which explanation is built. Questions about the constructed nature of experience, about how subjects are constituted as different in the first place, about how one's vision is structured, about language or discourse and history are left aside. The evidence of experience then becomes evidence for the fact of difference, rather than a way of exploring how difference is established, how it operates, how and in what ways it constitutes subjects who see and act in the world. And so, okay, if we can't rely on a simple authority, and we can't rely directly on our experience, then how are we to make meaning of anything? And here we enter into the science of the subject, which has been a slowly percolating element in Western philosophy since the Renaissance period, you could say, when the discovery of perspective in Renaissance art could have been said to usher in a new understanding, a new ability to take a perspective on human subjectivity itself. And we see this paralleled in philosophy in the work of Descartes, with his understanding that, I think, and my thoughts actually are reflections on a reality that is, in some sense, a phenomenon sui generis. And Descartes is often, I would say, misinterpreted to be saying that, mind and matter are separate. No, what he was doing is making, for the first time, an analytical distinction that allowed us to take perspective on our thoughts in a way that prior human history, Mikhail Bakhtin writes about this in the history of the novel, in the history of fiction, where he says, ancient forms of storytelling, there is no differentiation between narrative and truth. There's a kind of self-evidence to it, and the discovery of human interiority, of the capacity of interiority, which he attributes actually to the influence of monastic traditions and other forms of contemplative life, of which the early philosophers certainly partook, was critical in enabling this openness for a human science of subjectivity. And so moving toward the 19th century, when we have that science of subjectivity then moving into a science of hermeneutics, and there are many thinkers who contributed to this, but I'm just going to invoke here Wilhelm Dilthey, who wrote a major work on Schleiermacher, where he posited that the scientific explanation of nature, erklären, must be completed with a theory of how the world is given to human beings through symbolically mediated practices. And that's what we've been doing here today. So to provide such a theory is the aim of the philosophy of the humanities. And so he said, meaning, if the humanities are aiming towards a science of understanding, then we can't simply take any particular evidence, whether it's an image or a text, without understanding the world within which that image was produced, by whom, for what purpose, and that forms a hermeneutic circle that we can then use to get at what Hans-Georg Gadamer called the ontological event of truth. So we can actually use all of these subjective phenomena to begin to answer the question of what happened, or in the case of social theory, of what happens. What are the regularities and the patterns in human societies that give us insight and purchase into human behavior, and ultimately how we can modify that over time to achieve something like progress. So I want to end there and open it up for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. That was absolutely wonderful. Excellent. Okay, we have very few short minutes, unless you don't mind extending this into lunch hour a bit. Okay? Is that a problem? Okay, we're going to go with if you have any, a set of quick-fire machine gun questions and answers. Okay? So, Damien, can you? Yes? It has to be short, I'm afraid.
No problem.
Yeah.
So we were talking about how an image doesn't really have truth inside. It's the perspective of the person, correct? With that in mind, how can a person identify fake news with real news, since it depends on the perspective of the person? What if this person is ignorant about this information?
Okay, I'm going to let anybody, let's get the questions first, and then we'll have a quick round at the end, okay? Any more questions? Any more questions, anyone? Would anybody like to ask any questions as well? That's excellent. Anyone?
Going once.
So we only have one question? Okay. Okay, I have two questions. Okay, Atina, yes.
No, I was surprised, this is for Massimiliano actually, that, and also in relation to the war, the war story, like the photojournalism for war in particular, because when you were talking about the Gulf War, I think you both, referred to it maybe, but a great text I always thought was Jean Baudrillard, the Gulf War did not happen, because it was showing, in this kind of way that if you use this computer game simulation trying to evade the actual picture of people suffering or whatever, that it would look like a simulation rather than a real, and the idea that maybe the hyperreal is more real than the real it's simulated, basically. And in that sense, I think that there was another order that of simulating there by combining the two pictures. There was like another order created from the two pictures that was hyper to the real. It was to accentuate, it was the real maybe on steroids to show that this picture had the political ideological position. So the person that produced that wanted to produce a real that was more real than the real that it was, if you see what I mean. And I think that could potentially help you there in how you analyze. And I thought that you would have gone to it possibly, like to Baudrillard with this. But it's just a comment. It's not why didn't you?
Do we have any more questions? Yes, Tony.
Hello. Yeah. Quick question for Vince. The last piece, the political art piece. In Malta, very often, political art is not really understood or appreciated, or it just goes through. Is it an indication that this inability to understand political art is an indication that people are more susceptible to fake news?
Okay, I think we can actually get the answers. Vince, we'll begin with you and then we'll move backwards.
Well, I think, Tony, this is a very pertinent question because I think it's the vehicle itself that is actually not believed. The fact that the work sits within the confines or the context of fine art is actually not taken as a political comment at all, locally at least. It's taken as an art piece. And the reaction of people to something like that, even though the comment is very blatant and very straightforward, is not taken at the value that it should be taken, but it's taken within a value which is extrinsic to its real core. If that were to be written, for example, if I had to state something in text, then probably that would be contested big time. But the fact that the aesthetics, perhaps, of the piece and the context of the piece within a gallery situation did not conform to what we know or to what we normally contest as true or false, then the vehicle itself actually suffered from
Something we should have actually gone more into is contextualization and associative, how things are associated within the minds of the viewers, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. Cartoons are art, but yet political cartoons are automatically taken as being journalistic comment.
Exactly.
So there's always a sort of this...
Exactly, and fine art is actually the other way around, at least locally, unfortunately, I find.
Okay,
it's not like that.
Hubertus and... anybody would like to comment on Athena's and the young lady? I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
I will. Yeah.
Would you like?
Well,
Look, if Massimiliano starts, we'll never finish. So, Hubertus,
we were playing a game of
trying to avoid
kindness. Okay.
You have 1 minute to answer, Massimiliano.
1 minute to answer Baudrillard. Fine. In the three essays. The Gulf War will not happen. The Gulf War is not happening. The Gulf War did not happen. Addresses a huge amount of issues. I wanted to fly low and actually debate discussion starting from real examples. So my point, and I wanted to take the conversation back on that specific case because to me it was important to address that specific case. But I want to comment on that, or answer that, by reference to what Aranda, who won the World Press Award in 2013, with the picture of a dying man on his mother's laps in Yemen. He came and was called the Pietà, because it resembled Michelangelo once more. And he commented, why are you asking me all this question? I'm a photographer. I was there. I saw the thing. I took a photograph. So sometimes we create huge theories out of something that is very immanent, and very simple. When I work as a photographer, I was not asking myself, I was asking before going to the field, but when I was in the field, I was not asking myself, oh, let's make this picture much more Renaissance style or whatever. I was just shooting images and trying not to be killed. So again, there are very different layers and contextualization. How do we think about photojournalism? How do we think about cartoons? How do we think about art? They're all fields of meanings with their own register, their own rules. I think the challenge we have today, and with this I'm trying to answer your question, is that all these languages are now all constructed out of 0 and 1. They all share the same language, they're all the same basis, which is digital, 0 and 1.
Yep. We are actually sort of ironically, no, you're going to end off, Lamberto. Ironically, we are in a situation where, because we question so much, because we are being so aware of the situation, we're always looking for the agenda. And that is, of course, something which is, Hubertus.
Just perhaps to add that, and to combine the two questions. One is, of course, in 91, and it's when the so-called embedded journalism started. So it was a clear choice. There was a censorship from right at the beginning, which was in the head already. But something else I think one has to have and know is the history of photography, of course, is a history of lies. There is no truth in photography. Never. So it is the contextualization, as you just said, and even within the so-called indexicality of photography, it's always a framing. It is a framing. Read a wonderful article by Judith Butler on framing. And so the truth of framing, or the unframing of truth, whatever you may call it. And if you go back to war photography, the Crimean War in 1851. Sorry? Oh, sorry, wasn't it 51? Oh, you were great. 44, 46. Oh, 55, yeah, okay, 54, 56. Okay, yeah. So Matthew Brady. No, I didn't want to, now you brought me out of, I didn't even want to speak about the Crimean War I meant the Secession War in America. 60, or even later. No date now. But you know that the soldiers, they had to die several times on the field because they were displaced constantly to have the picturesque in the image. So it is always, and the gesture, I mean, is a pure aestheticization, linked with the index that he's having in the hand up. So there is a whole story to it. And this comes to the second question, your question is, of course, if, you know, the aim of any dictatorship is to keep the people stupid. This is what has to come. And this is, I mean, we are everywhere on the best way to it. With the president you have in America, you may either go against, you may try to understand what's happening, you may look at Brexit, what's happening. So we are all on a way to uneducate in a certain way. And this is the problem. So you come to the moment, I remember some years ago, I don't think it exists still, you had those tabloids, had a certain name with those most strangest things. I remember one cover, a boy who had the tongue out and hair was growing on there. And it was called New Disease. They were all fake images. But people believe in it. So it's essential. Absolutely essential. So just to the last word is, you know, in German, the word for education is Bildung. And Bildung is not only the image, of course, but comes from Einbildung, so from imagination. And this is what we all need, absolutely. This is why you have the privilege to have the Caravage here, as you said.
Thank you so much, Hubertus. I know we're actually completely out of time, but I am going to leave the last word to Natalie. Very briefly, Natalie, if you don't mind.
I actually want to end on your question because I think in a way that's kind of the whole point. You know, why are we at this conference if not to learn how to distinguish what is true from what is not? And I think the answer to your question may be not to start with fake news or what is, you know, self-evidently fake news, but with real news. Yeah. And we've seen some examples of that here, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. So this gets to the question of what historians would call source analysis, right? If you try to write history, you're generally dealing with an extremely sparse written record of evidence written by highly motivated ideological people, generally from the upper classes, who did their best to create as much fake news as they possibly could.
And get away with.
So we can talk more about that later, but yeah.
like all excellent discussions, this opens up a lot more questions than we have had time to answer.
Yeah.
Let's continue over lunch, shall we? Thank you very much for being here, and thank you guys for making this so interesting. Thank you.